There is a lie most men live inside without ever realizing it is a lie. They tell themselves they want freedom. Freedom of thought. Freedom of choice. Freedom from control. Freedom from limitation. They repeat the word like a mantra, as if saying it often enough might make it true. But Aldous Huxley saw through this illusion with frightening clarity. He understood something most people cannot tolerate hearing. Most men do not want freedom. They want comfort. Not because they are evil. Not because they are stupid, but because freedom is psychologically expensive. Freedom demands responsibility. Responsibility demands awareness. Awareness demands confrontation. And confrontation threatens everything that keeps the ego intact. Comfort, on the other hand, asks almost nothing. Comfort asks you to obey quietly, to consume endlessly, to distract yourself generously, to numb your discomfort before it turns into insight, to trade autonomy for convenience and call it progress. Most men accept this trade without protest, not because they are forced to, but because they want to. Freedom is not taken away from them. It is abandoned. And it is abandoned long before politics, long before technology, long before systems of control even need to intervene. It is abandoned the moment a man realizes that freedom requires him to become someone he has avoided being. A man who thinks for himself must face the terror of being wrong. A man who chooses his own values must accept the burden of standing alone. A man who lives freely cannot hide behind consensus ideology or authority when his life feels empty. Comfort removes that burden. Comfort gives him scripts. Comfort gives him identities. Comfort gives him distractions that dull the ache of unfulfilled potential. Comfort gives him pleasures that replace purpose. Comfort gives him noise that keeps him from hearing the quiet voice inside, asking uncomfortable questions. And the more comfort he receives, the less freedom he can tolerate. Huxley understood this dynamic long before it became obvious. He saw that the most effective form of control is not oppression. It is seduction. A population that is entertained does not rebel. A population that is distracted does not reflect. A population that is comfortable does not resist, not because it cannot, but because it does not want to. Freedom is dangerous because it strips away excuses. If you are free, your failures belong to you. Your emptiness belongs to you. Your wasted potential belongs to you. Your cowardice belongs to you. Comfort offers a gentler story. It tells you the system is to blame, that society is unfair, that someone else is responsible, that you are a victim of circumstances beyond your control. That meaning is optional. That discipline is outdated. That discomfort is unnecessary. And most men accept this story because it absolves them of the hardest task of all, becoming themselves. To be free is not to do whatever you want. That is childish freedom. That is impulse disguised as autonomy. True freedom is the capacity to act in alignment with truth, even when it costs you comfort, approval, and safety. And that kind of freedom terrifies the modern man, because the modern man has been trained to avoid pain, avoid responsibility, avoid solitude, avoid silence, avoid anything that might force him to confront the gap between who he is and who he could have been. Comfort fills that gap with stimulation, screens, pleasure, endless consumption, endless entertainment, endless opinions that feel like thinking without requiring thought. A man who is constantly stimulated never has to sit with himself, and a man who never sits with himself never discovers what he truly wants. He inherits his desires. He borrows his beliefs. He adopts identities that were handed to him and calls them his own. He confuses choice with freedom because he can select between options he never created. But freedom is not the ability to choose between products, ideologies, or lifestyles. Freedom is the ability to say no to what degrades you even when it feels good. And most men cannot say no to comfort. They say they want truth, but they recoil when truth demands sacrifice. They say they want meaning, but choose pleasure when meaning feels heavy. They say they want autonomy, but surrender at the moment responsibility appears. So they settle into a life that feels safe but hollow. a life where everything is easy except being honest with oneself. If this content making sense to you, subscribe to the channel, and thank you for your support. Huxley's warning was not political, it was psychological. He understood that the greatest threat to human freedom would not come from tyrants with whips, but from systems that give people exactly what they crave. Not truth, but convenience. Not purpose, but pleasure. Not depth, but distraction. A man who is comfortable does not ask dangerous questions. A man who is entertained does not feel the weight of his own life. A man who is numb does not notice the chains because they feel like cushions. And this is the quiet tragedy: most men are not imprisoned against their will. They are pacified by choice. They are not controlled by force. They are guided by appetite. They do not lose freedom suddenly. They trade it away slowly for small comforts that feel harmless until one day they realize they no longer know how to live without them. Freedom demands tension. Comfort dissolves it. Freedom requires inner authority. Comfort replaces it with external validation. Freedom forces you to face uncertainty. Comfort wraps uncertainty in routines and rituals that keep you obedient without ever noticing. So when you ask why most men prefer comfort to freedom, the answer is not moral, it is existential. Freedom would require them to confront the truth of their lives, and most men would rather be comfortable than awake. Freedom is not crushed in men, it is anesthetized. No one takes it from them. They set it down willingly, piece by piece, in exchange for relief. Relief from uncertainty, relief from responsibility, relief from the burden of deciding who they are. This is where Huxley was most dangerous, because he understood that domination no longer needs violence. Once people learn to love their sedation, the modern man is not enslaved by chains. He is enslaved by comfort rituals. He wakes up to stimulation, consumes information without digestion, works without meaning, escapes without rest, seeks pleasure without intimacy, goes to sleep without silence. Every moment is filled, nothing is faced, and because nothing is faced, nothing is chosen. This is not an accident of technology. It is a psychological preference. Most men are not trained for freedom. They are trained for convenience. From an early age, they learn that discomfort is a problem, that boredom is a defect, that frustration should be eliminated immediately, that pain has no meaning beyond pathology. But freedom is inseparable from discomfort. A man who cannot tolerate discomfort will never be free, because freedom places you in tension with the world. It forces you to choose values rather than inherit them. It demands solitude. It demands confrontation with your own inadequacy. It demands that you stand without applause. Comfort offers a far easier alternative: belonging without becoming. You can belong to systems you do not question. You can adopt opinions you did not earn. You can repeat slogans and feel righteous without understanding. You can signal virtue without risking truth. You can feel morally elevated while remaining inwardly empty. This is the soft tyranny Huxley warned about. Not a boot on the neck, but a pillow over the face. Men become obedient not because they are threatened, but because obedience feels easier than self-authorship. Freedom would require them to admit that their lives are smaller than they could be, and that admission is unbearable. So instead, they learn to love comfort and call it peace. They learn to love routine and call it stability. They learn to love consumption and call it happiness. They learn to love distraction and call it balance. But beneath this calm surface, something rots. The masculine spirit, the drive to confront chaos, to endure difficulty, to carve meaning from resistance, atrophies when it is never exercised. Men become emotionally reactive, but existentially passive. They have opinions about everything and agency over nothing. They rage online, debate endlessly, signal awareness, but never change their lives. Because changing one's life is dangerous. It exposes the lie that says, I had no choice, I was trapped, I was powerless. Comfort protects this lie. If you are comfortable, You can tell yourself that you are fine. If you are fine, you never have to ask who you might have been. Freedom would force that question, and that question is lethal to the ego. Masculinity, when stripped of its characters, is not dominance or aggression. It is capacity. The capacity to endure, the capacity to choose, the capacity to stand alone, the capacity to act without permission, the capacity to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing. Comfort erodes capacity. It replaces endurance with avoidance, choice with preference, solitude with distraction, action with commentary. And over time, the man who lives this way loses something essential: inner authority. He no longer trusts himself, so he looks outward for validation, for rules, for consensus. He becomes governable not because he is weak, but because he is untrained. Huxley understood that a population raised on pleasure does not need to be ruled harshly. It will regulate itself. Men will police each other's thoughts, mock deviation, punish seriousness, ridicule ambition, flatten distinction, because anyone who chooses freedom becomes a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous. A free man exposes the cost of comfort. He reminds others, silently, that their lives are chosen, not imposed. So he must be ridiculed, dismissed, or pathologized. Better to call him extreme than to admit he is free. This is why comfort becomes moralized. Anything that demands sacrifice is labeled toxic. Anything that demands discipline is labeled oppressive. Anything that demands responsibility is labeled outdated. Comfort reframes itself as compassion. Weakness reframes itself as sensitivity. Avoidance reframes itself as self-care. And men accept these redefinitions because they make stagnation feel virtuous. But the cost remains. A man who avoids discomfort loses access to meaning. Meaning is not given. It is forged under pressure. It arises when you voluntarily place yourself in situations that demand more of you than you want to give. Comfort prevents this. It keeps you safe and small. Huxley's warning was not that men would be controlled. It was that they would consent. They would choose sedation over sovereignty, ease over excellence, stimulation over depth. Not because they are incapable of freedom, but because freedom asks too much. And the most tragic part is this: men do not realize what they have lost because comfort dulls memory. They forget what it feels like to be alive, not entertained, not aroused, not distracted, alive. There is a moment, quiet, unsettling, when a man realizes that no one is coming to take his freedom from him, because it's already gone, not stolen, not crushed, not outlawed, simply unused. Freedom, like any muscle, atrophies when it is not exercised, and most men stopped exercising it long ago. They didn't notice when it happened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no collapse, no crisis, no clear point of loss. It happened gradually, disguised as progress. If this content making sense to you, subscribe to the channel, and thank you for your support. Life became easier, faster, smoother, more convenient, and with each layer of comfort added, another layer of inner authority was removed. Choice replaced commitment. Preference replaced principle. Ease replaced meaning. Until one day, a man wakes up and realizes that nothing in his life actually demands him. Nothing asks for courage. Nothing asks for sacrifice. Nothing asks for depth. Nothing asks for transformation. And instead of feeling relieved, he feels empty. This is the cost Huxley was pointing toward. A man without freedom is not necessarily oppressed. He is uninitiated into struggle, uninitiated into responsibility, uninitiated into the burden of authorship. He lives inside structures he did not build, believes ideas he did not test, desires things he did not choose. And because everything is given, nothing is earned. Comfort gives him a life, but not a reason to live it. Freedom, by contrast, is merciless. It offers no guarantees, no safety net, no script. It hands you your life and says, now justify it. That is why most men recoil. Not because they are incapable, but because freedom removes the last excuse. If you are free, you cannot blame the system for your emptiness. You cannot blame society for your cowardice. You cannot blame circumstance for your stagnation. You must face the unbearable possibility that your life is the result of your own choices. Comfort spares you that confrontation. It allows you to float through existence without ever asking what you stand for, what you would die for, what you would sacrifice for. It replaces meaning with maintenance, and a maintained life may be stable, but it is not alive. Huxley's genius was seeing that future tyrannies would not need to suppress rebellion. They would prevent it by dissolving the conditions that make rebellion meaningful. Why rebel when you are entertained? Why resist when you are comfortable? Why risk when you are sedated? Freedom becomes an abstraction, a word admired in theory but avoided in practice. Because real freedom is not comfortable. It is lonely. It is tense. It is demanding. It forces you to stand apart when the crowd wants agreement, to endure uncertainty when others seek reassurance, to tolerate disapproval without collapsing into resentment. It forces you to become someone who does not need to be told who he is. And that kind of man is dangerous, not to society, to systems built on passivity. A free man cannot be easily predicted. He cannot be easily categorized. He cannot be easily governed by pleasure or fear. He is not reactive. He is responsive. He does not outsource his conscience. He does not borrow his identity. He does not wait for permission to act. This is why comfort culture subtly punishes him. He is called extreme, uncompassionate, outdated, problematic, not because he is cruel, but because he exposes the cost of sedation. His very existence asks a question most men do not want to answer. What are you doing with your freedom? So they mock him, dismiss him, reduce him to a stereotype. Anything is easier than admitting that freedom is still possible, and they simply chose not to claim it. Because the most unsettling truth is this: no one is stopping men from being free. They are stopping themselves. Every time they choose comfort over courage, every time they choose distraction over depth, every time they choose safety over sovereignty, every time they choose pleasure over purpose. Freedom does not disappear all at once. It erodes through neglect, and when a man finally notices, he often feels a strange grief, not for what was taken, but for what was never attempted. A sense that something essential was left unused, a life not fully inhabited, a self never fully claimed. This is the quiet tragedy of modern men. They live long, comfortable lives without ever discovering what they are capable of enduring. But here is the part Huxley leaves unsaid, the part that still terrifies systems built on comfort. Freedom can be reclaimed, not through rebellion, not through politics, not through ideology, but through discipline, through discomfort, through voluntary confrontation with reality, through choosing the harder path when the easier one is available, through building inner authority instead of seeking external approval, through standing alone without becoming bitter, through living as if your life actually belongs to you. Most men will not do this, not because they cannot, but because they will not give up the warm numbness of comfort. But the few who do become something rare, not dominant, not superior, free. And that freedom, earned, embodied, irreversible, is the one thing no system can offer, no comfort can replace, and no authority can grant, because it must be taken. And most men will never take it.